Hey y'all, how are you doing? I'm great. Thank you so much for asking. It's me, Kim, and I'm back for another video. A few weeks ago, Kev on Stage posted this video interview with a woman named Jackie Hill Perry. She's an evangelist and a musician, and I think that she describes herself as an ex-stud, meaning she used to be gay. And in that video, Jackie Hill Perry said some things that are really disconcerting if you believe in affirming the rights and the personhood of gay folks. And Kev on Stage got so much backlash that he actually took the video down. I thought it would be useful for us to have a conversation with progressive women who are deeply engaged with the Christian faith about why Jackie Hill Perry's way is not the only way, about how we can create Christian communities that are welcoming and affirming, where people who are gay or lesbian don't have to be ashamed or fearful. And they did an amazing job. Candace and Zora, they blew my mind. I mean, when I say they blew my mind, girl, I was trying to take notes during this conversation. That's how deep it was. It's very heady. Sometimes it gets a little dense, but I promise you, somebody gonna be freed by this conversation. Absolutely, absolutely. So here it is. Thank you so much for being here, Candace and Emerson. Could y'all just tell me a little bit about what you do? Let's start with Candace.
Greetings. I'm Candace Simpson. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a Brooklyn native, and I'm a religious educator and minister in the Baptist tradition, and I'm a minister at the Concord Baptist Church of Christ in Brooklyn, New York. And those are my people. Those are people that mean a lot to me. And my project is around Christian education as political education. So what are the sacred texts and the secular texts that become sacred that can help spark our imagination for designing the world that we all deserve to live in? So I am a seminary graduate. I went to Union Seminary in New York. And I'm just so glad that we're having this conversation, of course, broadly about how we can live authentically and holistically and with joy. So thanks for having us.
Hey, y'all. Likewise, I echo that sentiment. I'm really excited about having this conversation. Like Candace, I am also a seminary graduate. I have a Master of Divinity and a Master of Theological Studies from Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. And I practiced ministry in the Unitarian Universalist Association for a few years before I came to graduate school here in Houston. And specific to this conversation, I went to seminary because I was and still am very interested in how literature, namely the literature of the Black radical tradition, as a set of sacred texts, right, shapes our understanding of God and our understanding of each other. So I went into seminary asking questions about what practices are proffered by Black literature that really allow us to displace this notion of the self in favor of a Black communal relation, and what I call in my current dissertation project, Black speculative relation. And the Black women writers who really undergird my exploration of these questions are Octavia, Estelle, Butler, of course. I wrote my Master of Theological Studies thesis on Octavia Butler and the womanist imagination. Of course, Toni Morrison, Toni K. Bambara, and Alice Walker, whose theo-poetic definition of womanism is really foundational to how I practice Black feminism. So that's me.
Yes, and I realized I called you the wrong name. You go by Zora. So sorry, names are important. I screwed it up. Okay. But thank you. Thank you guys so much again for being here. Let's go ahead and jump into it. So I watched a lot of videos, not only from Jackie Hill Perry, but from other people who describe themselves as ex-homosexuals. And something that they talk a lot about is being born in sin and then having to turn away from that sin. Do you think that people are born in sin?
I think sin is the thing that keeps us from flourishing. I think sin is the fact that I will not be able to own a home in the community that I am from, the community that I love at this rate. I think gentrification is a sin. I think sexual assault is a sin. I think exploitation of labor is a sin. I think there are a lot of things that I think are sinful. And so in that regard, I do think that we are born in sin because we're born into these systems that conspire against our flourishing. I'm not sure that sin is something that has something to do with the people that I am sexually intimate with, that I'm romantically involved with. If there is sin involved, it relates to the ways that we're checking in with each other. Are we making sure that we're well? Are we, taking care of each other? Am I considering your feeling? Like, those are the things that when we talk about sin, somehow we've only been talking about orientation or desire or gender. We've been talking about it the ways that white evangelicals have been asking us to talk about sin. And that to me is sinful.
I definitely agree with that, right? I don't hold a conception of sin that is rooted in the flesh, right? Like I too think of sin as, if I think of sin at all, right, as a violation of community relation, right? Those things that prevent us from being in right relationship with each other, right? Those things that, as Candace said, conspire against our life, right? And so, the things that, the systems of anti-Blackness that really undergird the kind of things that structure even our desire, right? So I really don't think of sin as this thing that is both rooted in the flesh and can be either repressed or thought of as this thing that one can be freed from as an individual endeavor.
I like what y'all are saying. It makes perfect sense to me. But I grew up in churches where sin was very explicitly laid out. And it seems like there are very divergent strains of thought around this. So there's a great deal of people who say, the Bible tells you exactly what sin is. Don't murder, don't be an adulterer, don't lay with men, don't lie or whatever. But what y'all are explaining diverges from that. And so what do we do with the sins that are outlined in the Bible?
So I think that there are a few things, right? And I think that this echoes one of the things that Candace mentioned early in response to your first question, which is this conception of sin is also rooted in a particular kind of white evangelical way of thinking about righteousness, right? It's rooted in fundamentally is rooted in anti-Blackness, right? And it's also rooted in this idea of this sort of modern Enlightenment idea of the individual and of the self, right? That Black folks don't even have access to, right? And so I think it's just really important to begin to separate the ways that this section of folks who practice a certain kind of Christianity, right? That is one that is really toxic and harmful and will have you thinking about Christianity and your religious or Christian walk as this thing that is an individual endeavor, right? That is cut off from community, that is invested in a certain kind of individuality and self-dominion over other people, over the world, right? Over the earth and the planet, right? And we see how much damage that has already done, right? That kind of Christianity is the kind of Christianity that gave people the sort of psychic permission to own other people, right? And so it's the kind of thing where, right, to extend that, like Black folks have always had to figure out, right, how to make a different kind of religious practice out of the tools that were already available, right? So it's my contention that the kind of white evangelical Christianity that is pervasive is not the kind of Christianity that Black folks have historically practiced, have historically lived into. And so that notion of sin is really not even applicable, right? And it is certainly not one that governs my own life and practice as I think about the religious possibilities of Christianity. I'm not a practitioner of Christianity solely, right? But I definitely think that there are some distinctions that have to be made between that very individual, self-centered, self-affirming kind of Christian practice over and against the Black queerness, communal, community accountable kind of Christian and religious practices that sustain Black life.
I just want to say retweet everything you said. And also, I'm appreciative that you said, you're not just a practitioner of just the Christian faith. And I think that's another thing that gets lost in these conversations. Black folks practice a host of religions. Even those of us who consider ourselves Christians are also tapping into some other ways of communing with the divine that don't exist in other strains of Christianity. And there's something very Black, very Afro-diasporic about the ways that we relate to God. And so starting with the Bible is not necessarily not to point us as like a monolith, but like that's not the Black way to start. We start with experience. Has he ever made a way when you didn't have a dime? Has he ever checked in just right on time? Has he ever picked you up when you are down? Has he ever placed your feet on solid ground? Then Jesus is a rock in a weary land. And so we were like, that's where we come from. We talk about the experience and the ways that, in my context, Christ has made a way for us. God has made a way for us. Holy Spirit has been the advocate for us. And so to start for Black folks, particularly in the United States, to start with the Bible, when we really only were allowed to read the Bible in its entirety without consequence recently, is not significant. Like it is missing a lot of stuff. And so because we spent so much time, and I know that my starting place is the United States because that's my context. But other people in other, life experiences will say it a different way. But because we spent so much time talking about experience, faith has to have material realities for my life. So I can't start with the Bible that has told me to obey my master, that has told me to shut up in the temple, that has told me that my skin is, is a curse, that has told me, I can't start where white folks start. And it is not an accident. I mean, I don't want to put too much of my mouth on, these other people because I'm trying to preserve my own peace and my own sanity and my own wellness in this hour. But it is not lost on me that the people who are spewing this kind of benevolent hatred are also the darlings of white evangelicals who don't give two cares about our Black lives otherwise. So we have already decided as Black people that no matter what, we're going to survive. We've already decided, I'm going to get out of here somehow, some way. That is the womanist impetus, the womanist, instinct, which is, I need to get out of here alive and whole. Anything that's going to prohibit me from living well, that's going to prohibit me from flourishing, that's going to prohibit me from breathing, it could stay outside. So I ain't starting in the text. And that's coming from somebody whose work is biblical text. I love the Bible. But what I'm not going to do is play ping pong with people who've already decided that I am not human, worthy of protection, and worthy of love. Ain't nobody got time for that.
Mm-hmm.
So I hear you. I just wonder, I know that Candace, your parents lead a church, and I'm wondering how much interaction do you ever have with people who say, this is the word of God, it's perfect, God gave it to us, so why y'all trying to do all that extra stuff?
I have a lot of interaction with those people because no matter, the text is sacred to us. It's a communal text. And I think really what we're witnessing when people say, well, the Bible says this, is we're watching what happens when you have an educational system that teaches people to hear one thing and regurgitate it. When we have an educational system, both inside and out of the church, inside and out of school, that teaches people to parrot things, then that's how people react to text. And I will say that there are people who have tried it and have tried to, this is why this conversation is so delicate for so many of us, because every single queer Christian, every single trans Christian, every single genderqueer, non-binary Christian that I've had side conversations with about this particular strain of thought has said, every time that they've said, well, I'm queer and Christian, I'm trans and Christian, I'm genderqueer and Christian, people give them texts like gay girl, good God, or something, whatever the name of the text is. And so that should say something to us about what people actually consider the word of God. Is the word of God that which liberates and that which conspires for our freedom? Or is it the thing that is currently a bestseller because of the platforming that Kev has allowed?
I definitely agree. I think that if I am to, again, start from any text, right, in terms of thinking about desire, right? Or thinking about what it means to live in the flesh, right? I start with one of my sacred texts, which is Toni Morrison's Beloved, right? In which Baby Suggs Holy tells us that, here in this place, we flesh, right? So love it and love it hard, right? And this is an exhortation that I take seriously when it comes to practicing any kind of spiritual orientation, right? Because if I love my flesh, right, then I love the possibility of Blackness, right? If I love my flesh, I love the possibilities that open up through the practice of queerness, right? I love then the way that this life of desire and care and speculative relation positions me to be in deep communion with others, right? Like those are the possibilities of the flesh, right? Those are the possibilities of thinking about expressing a particular kind of love and care and desire for flesh that has been disdained, right? Because Baby Suggs Holy tells us yonder, they don't love your flesh, right? And so we have a particular communal responsibility to love it, right? And so I can't believe that. And then also believe in this like sinful kind of thing that's rooted in my person, right? Like that, they don't work together. And so if I am going to choose a particular kind of practice of the flesh, it won't be the suppression of desire, right? The repression of a kind of what Hill Perry calls a temptation, right? Which creates a certain kind of misery that she lives in that you can actually see, right? Right. And she thinks that she is doing this as a way to like bring her closer to what and who she believes is God, right? But like it's not aligned literally with the things that she says, right, in her ministry writ large, and certainly not in that interview with Kev on stage.
I know that this is a text that is supposed to free me in my relationship to Christ, is supposed to free me, but how do I determine which parts of the Bible that I say are cool and which parts I disregard because they are meant to keep me in chains or meant to tie me to colonial concepts of sin? Like, how do we pick and choose?
I think that that's a really good question, right? Because I think that one of the things that I think is important to say is that the version or versions of the Bible as sacred text that we have now, right, are several iterations away from the text that they started, right? And I think that we also have to think about the creative process, right, that is attributed solely to this entity called the Holy Spirit, which then in turn is used to think the Bible as infallible, right, in a certain way. And I think that approach, right, the approach that sacred means infallible, right? Like basically that is how the one's relationship with the Bible tends to be formed in this kind of evangelical strain of Christianity, right? And that is meant to discourage any questions, right? Any critical kinds of approaches to this text, to this work of literature, right? It is meant to discourage a kind of relation to the text that allows you in community, a particular relation to what is being said, right? And so what happens is it becomes less of a communal text, right? It becomes less of an experience of both reading and practicing and more of a set of unquestionable assumptions, right? And I think that a kind of Christianity or even a kind of religious praxis that takes seriously the text as sacred, but not the text as infallible, creates a different relation both to the text and to each other in terms of reading in community, right? It allows for a kind of critical thinking and critical approach, not only to the text, but to the relation that the text is meant to create, right? And I think not doing that, we get this, right? We get this situation where this Black woman can, express a certain kind of commitment to these things that are proffered as absolute truth, right? As opposed to thinking through how it creates the conditions for a certain kind of relation, right? And I think that is where this iteration of Christianity that she is like both seems to be invested in and also profits from, right? Like this book after this interview is like #1 on that terrible bookseller that I won't name on here, right? But, but it is, so it's something about refusing the practice of reading that really, I find really offensive given the work that we have had to do as Black folks, right? To be able to read, right? It was once illegal for us to actually read. And I think we do the legacy of that work a disservice when we cut off our capacity for reading in favor of just allowing the Bible to say a thing without question.
Yeah. And by reading, you mean like deep exploration, interpretation, exegesis. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, this is exactly like, so my work is as an educator, and I'll answer this question like in an allegory or, a metaphor.
Okay, parable. Okay, yeah.
Just, right? Come on, Jesus. Earlier this week, so last week I watched Hamilton for the first time. It was the first time it was accessible to me. That's a story on its own. And I watched it and I found myself struggling with the ways that we are trained to put things in the woke versus problematic binary. So if something is woke or generative or good, then it's something we should amplify, we should pay attention to. It has no flaws. It should never be critiqued. It should never be engaged. What it says is what it says. That's it, period. And if it's problematic, then we do the opposite. So, if it's problematic, let's pull it apart. Let's, poke holes in it. Let's show it how it's, an issue. And I think life is more than just these good and bad binaries. Now, I know what I think and I believe about Hamilton. I have serious concerns about the project. I have serious concerns about what it's teaching us and how generations of people will come to understand the founding fathers because of this meta-narrative that has been inserted. And I cannot... there's a way that this art is exposing things that we need to pay attention to. It's exposing what our assumptions are about power, what our assumptions and our who we tend to side with. And I say all that because the way that I feel about Beyonce's music, the way I feel about, Disney movies, the way I feel about text in general is how I approach the Bible. For me, what makes the Bible a sacred text is that it is a communal text, which means we discern, to your question, we discern which parts of it we take and we hold based on the community's understanding of what it means to live and flourish. So, for example, at Concord, we don't sing, "He washed me white as snow," because for our community, which is a Black community in Bedford-Stuyvesant, being washed as white as snow is not something any of us are desiring. That's not it's not desirable for this community. So communities already make choices about the ways that we're going to approach the text based on communal survival. And I think it goes back to what Zora is saying, that, again, our nation has not prepared critical thinkers. Yeah. We have not prepared critical thinkers in the church, in politics, in the world, in schools. We have not prepared people who know how to see a document and ask critical questions of that document. And so what we're seeing is people who are like, well, should I just love the whole Bible or should I throw it all out? Let me tell you something. There's some parts. So since quarantine, I have been reading the letters a whole different way. And the reason why the letters slap so hard is because you get a sense of what it's like to respond to a community that's spread out. There is no central church. And so I build empathy with the writers of all these letters because I'm doing the same thing right now in my house, making think pieces, writing little blogs, doing tweet threads, all of those things. There's an empathy that is established that now helps me understand the text in a whole different way. And I think, I am not going to be the person who says that everything in the Bible is ethical. There's rape in the Bible. There's conquest. There's war. There's militarism. There are war crimes. There are all kinds of things that are in the book. And I think, again, what makes the text sacred is that we, as a community, get to say, should we replicate this or not? Yeah. And I think that's what's missing from a lot of the ways that we are teaching people, not just to be citizens, but also to be believers. We're not making space for that critical imagination that would free more people.
Yeah. Y'all, those answers did it for me. Y'all connected the dots. Y'all connected the dots for me. No, for real. All right. So something else that I noticed when I watched a lot, when I tried to go deep into this particular segment of theology, was there's a lot of talk about struggle. Jackie Hill Perry talks a lot about struggle. Like Christ struggled, so we're going to struggle. And that rubs me the wrong way. So I do wonder, what place should or does struggle have in your relationship to God and to faith?
I actually was, I'm looking at my bookshelf right now. And the book that actually freed me from this sense of I must struggle like Christ is Delores Williams' Sisters in the Wilderness. And one of her arguments is that for Black women, we have to stop making ourselves into junior Christ figures, that we have to stop, this involuntary surrogacy that suggests that the more that I suffer, the more pain I take on, the more jewels I'll get in my crown after all this is over. And instead, what she compels us to do, which I think is a really healthy, it's a healthy shift for those of us who don't want to completely leave these spaces, is she asks us to think about not the sacrifice as something to replicate, but to think about Christ's ministry, to think about the ministerial vision of Christ. And when we focus on the life and the activities and the politics and even the speeches and sermons and lessons of Christ, that's a whole different radical shift. You get the sense that Christ, and I'm saying Christ because I'm very Baptist and we love our Jesus. Yes. That Jesus spends his time with people who are socially marginalized. Jesus spends his time feeding people without expecting any kind of coin. He heals people without a copay. He loves, he makes the good Henny keep flowing when it stopped flowing at the wedding. You get the sense that this is a Jesus who is human and divine, who is concerned about the flourishing of a community under empire. And so that's how he got. That's what made him a target for the state. That's what made his mission so dangerous, because he helped us to think about more radical ways to love one another. And if you think about the world that we live in now, like, it is no accident that people who are doing community work for Black folks are also being targeted, surveilled, disappearing, being arrested, and then, even worse, because it presents a threat to the ways that the world is. It presents a threat to the empire. And so this question about like suffering, we have to kind of pull it apart, because in life you will suffer. I got my wisdom teeth pulled out and I didn't like it. It was not enjoyable. I hated it. I'm also still paying for it. Like, it was not a pleasurable experience, but that was a kind of pain that went along with life that did not have I didn't seek it out. It is what it is. Pain happens in life, but it does not make us more worthy of God's love.
Okay.
Yeah, I definitely, I understand that, and I want to affirm that position as well. And I think that when I think of struggle, right, I don't think of individual like pain, right? Again, I think about that communal wrestling, that communal work that is trying to get something else, something new, something in excess of our current circumstances to emerge, right? So I don't think of this kind of personal martyrdom that Candace mentions in Delores Williams's text, right? Like struggle is about how we contend with and for each other, right? Against oppression, right? Against empire, right? In favor of trying to, one, bring about the end of the world and bring about the beginning of the new one, right? Like, what are we to do, like, after the end of the world that we struggle to bring about, right? And so I think that is where struggle starts to get confused with a particular kind of individual suffering, right? And I don't think that suffering and struggle, right? Suffering and wrestling are not the same kinds of things, right? The kinds of things that we are called and sent to struggle to and for each other, right? Whatever your religious practices might be, the practice of struggle is meant to bring about something, right? Not to deny, repress, or sever the flesh from being in community, right? And I think when we begin to think about struggle in that way and not think about struggle as synonymous with suffering, then we really can do the work and wrestle with and in community to bring about something else, right? Something akin to freedom, and then something that is freedom, right? As opposed to thinking about this in such an individual kind of self-obsessed way, right? I just think that our work really is to displace the self, right? And do this thing that is community oriented, community accountable, right? Community like that's rooted in the desire for the community to make these kinds of freedom moves, right? And not about a kind of individual, punishment of the flesh.
Yeah. It's so interesting because when I hear these ex-homosexuals talk about the struggle, and Jackie Hill Perry talks about it's a struggle every day, every single day I struggle. And I'm like, is Jesus hazing you? Like, is this like never ending, unending hazing where you are going through all of this torment individually to prove yourself? She literally says, like, that is what you have to do to prove your commitment to God, and how much do you want it, and how much do you desire to be closer to him? And I'm like, that don't sound fun at all.
Because it ain't. right, because it's not, right? I mean, she has admitted in this interview and in other spaces, right, that she believes that this kind of toxic Christianity, right, requires her disavowal of desire, right, which is a disavowal of the flesh, right? And this is the thing that is likely the most harmful, right, to her and to those who sit under or happen to hear her teachings because she's been given a certain kind of platform, right? And I think that if one does not return to a particular kind of love of the flesh, right, and the recognition that anywhere your flesh, your Black flesh specifically, right, is not loved, then that is not a place where you are going to get free.
Yeah. It feels like y'all are saying that our bodies, I think so many of us are taught that our bodies are sinful, our bodies are wrong, and we need to detach our spiritual selves from the physical selves, but those things, they're inextricably linked. And so that your desires, the innate being, like trying to reject that, disavow that, how can that lead you closer to Christ? How can that lead you to a righteous faith walk when God made those things interconnected?
Mm-hmm. I mean, so I'll tell you, I'm also very much a liturgical nerd. And so I get excited about worship. I get excited about the rituals and the sacraments and the ways that we perform and remember what it means to belong to a larger community. So baptisms make me cry. Communion makes me cry. The right hand of fellowship makes me, like, these things, they do something to me, and they're mediated through my flesh. And one of my favorite seasons in our Christian calendar is Advent. And Advent is the season leading up to Christmas. And what compels me every year about this season is the reminder that for Christians, we believe in a Christ who did not come to earth as a full-grown man, did not come to earth as a teenager, but as that we follow a Christ who came enfleshed, a Christ who journeyed with us as human beings from his mother's womb. And there's something beautiful about the reminder that if Christ wanted to show up, skip puberty, skip, growth spurts, voice changing, teething, all of those other things that are associated with being a human, Christ could have skipped those things. But there was something that he had to experience. This is part of our myth. This is part of how we talk about the story, that he knows what it's like to be us. I can't talk to somebody who hasn't lived my life about the struggles I'm going through. And so I think, as part of the Christian narrative, there is something beautiful about the sense that in the way that we think about divinity, that there's space for flesh. How could flesh be sinful when God meets us here every time? Like, we don't have, flesh is not here, spirit is not here. We experience beautiful things through our flesh. We cry and our bellies shake, like we weep and it appears on our face, like our bodies tell on us. And so this sense that, and it's not just the people we talk about, this sense that you must deny your flesh and deny pleasure is something that has been taught to us by people who don't, as Zora said, don't love our Black flesh. They've already decided that not only are we sexually deviant, but we are they want to take our parts and put it in museums. They've already decided that, we don't experience pain. And so they've pioneered entire fields of medicine on our bodies. And so it is an act of resistance to reclaim fleshly pleasure. And I want to say that without, I don't think we're just talking about sex. I think we're talking about the food that we eat, the people we spend our time with, the things that we do with our bodies, the smells that are in our home, the things that we see in our community. Those things should bring us pleasure, because why? It's already hell on earth. I don't need to subject myself to further internalized hatred. What kind of God is hoping that I continually it's not hitting for me. It's not hitting.
And I think that that's a really good point, right? Because it's this, I think the move is the recognition that our beliefs are practiced through the flesh, right? There is no other way for you to signal what you believe, what's important to you, what are your ethics, what are your politics, right? Except through the flesh, right? We're not going to know if you are just sitting there imagining whatever your commitments are, right? And I think that that's one of the things that is really important, I think, about about Christianity specifically, but also about any religious proclamation or any religion itself that is worth its salt, as the elders might say. It is about what is it that you practice, right? How can we know, right, that this is the thing that is important to you, right? Because you put your body on the line, right? And you don't put your body on the line in solo, right? You put your body, your flesh on the line in community, and together we move not only toward and in freedom, right? But in expression of what it is we believe, right? What is it that is important, right? What is back to the wrestling and the struggling, right? What are we putting our flesh, right, on the line for, right? And I think to Candace's point, right, this is absolutely not only about who we desire sexually, right? But womanism says, right, a womanist is somebody who loves women and men sexually and non-sexually, who loves the community, right? Who is who does these things with and in the flesh, right? And establishes a particular kind of relation in the flesh that is always already meaningful and embodied. The flesh is really key to all of this, right? To any kind of religious practice, your beliefs are practiced in and through the flesh, right? And in and through the flesh of others, right? Because this is not a solo endeavor. So to imagine that you have complete control of this walk, right? And that it is yours to sort of repress and do what you will with the flesh, right? To be functionally heterosexual so that you are doing this thing that aligns you with this God, right? That you, by your own admission, believe is communal, but now you doing this individual kind of thing that means doing serious violence to the flesh, right? And I think that that's just a really important thing when we begin to talk about religion and religious practices, because the key word is practice, right? I don't think that you can just be anything. I don't think you can just be a Christian. I don't think that you can just be queer. I don't think you can just be feminist, right? I think all of those are practices in the flesh, right? And there's no way to do anything without Praxis.
So we talked about the connection between the colonial, like the white colonial interpretations of the Bible, the links between that and the focus on sexual sin and the embrace of homophobia. But something I also thought was interesting, I watched a spoken word poem called My Life as a Stud, and by Jackie Hill Perry. And something I also thought was interesting was her discussion, and again, like this is another trope among the ex-homosexuals, about how they failed at performing normative gender roles. So Jackie Hill Perry says, the femininity that she naturally has, it didn't come easy to her. She wanted to she wore a strap on and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, what's wrong with that? And then other ex-homosexuals, men will say, I was out here switching and God doesn't want me to switch, so I straightened up. And I'm like, well, what's wrong with switching? Like, so how does this colonial framework, this in colonial biblical interpretation, connects to normative gender or a compulsory performance of very narrow gender roles?
I don't think Black women get to be women. We never get to be women.
Mm-hmm.
And I think particularly this is why we need to show up better for Black trans women, because one, that's what we should be doing. And two, we are suffering under similar weights. We're suffering under the lie that womanhood looks a certain way. When I say we are suffering, I mean Black trans women, Black cis women, those of us who consider each other sisters, we have never been able to perform femininity. I'll put it to you this way. I have been 6 feet since 2005, 2006. I'm 250 pounds. In most people's eyes, I am not performing femininity, I'm not performing womanhood in the way that we imagine womanhood. When we think about womanhood, we think dainty, feminine, girl, we have all these assumptions of what a woman looks like, which is why I saw this really beautiful thread. I wish I could remember the sister who was tweeting about it, but that's how and why cis Black women also get misgendered. The ways we've been talking about as a society, Serena Williams, the way people, talk about Wendy Williams and misgender and remove womanhood that these people have already claimed for ourselves. We've already said, I'm a woman. And so again, it is a white lie. It is a lie of white supremacy that womanhood only looks a certain way, or that it performs a certain way. This is why every 6 months, or not even, because now we on Corona time, so it's really every 3 weeks, there's this argument about on Twitter, would you be okay with your woman making more money than you? These are all, if you track the genealogy, this is all coming from the lie that women must be subservient, submissive, less than, shorter than, smaller than their husband, their boyfriend, because of course everybody is straight. And so, my least favorite thing to see is, first of all, I hate when people take pictures of other folks without their consent. I used to do that. I no longer do that. But I hate seeing people's very intimate photos go viral with the question thoughts. And so, there may be a Black woman who's fat, who's taller, who's dark skinned, paired with a skinny Black man. And then people will say, what's going on here? Or they'll say things like, and I can't even get a text back. And what's underneath that, what's pushing that, is this idea that there's something wrong about the way these two people decided to be together. So what white supremacy makes possible is that nobody actually wins. Because here you have two cishet people in a relationship and they're still doing it wrong. Because white supremacy, because anti-Blackness, because cishet normativity has taught us that only certain bodies belong together. Only certain bodies get rights. Only certain bodies should expect to move with freedom and ease in the world. And so I don't know how, as a Black woman, I mean, I feel sadness and despair when people like Jackie Hill Perry talk about this I didn't feel like I didn't feel like womanhood was accessible to me, because me too, sis. Like, how many of us have been out in the world and watched white women get treated differently? Like, it's just not doing it.
At the core of this is a framing of the category of the human, right? And what is true about everything that what we call woman, what we call man, what we understand as cis het, right? Like, all of these things flow from the category of the human, and it is a category that Black folks do not have access to, right? And I think from there, then, when we think of Blackness as queerness, right? And queerness as Blackness, right? Because it exists in excess of the category of the human, right? Like, there is no way to enter the category of the human, right? I actually don't have any use for it because it doesn't have any use for me, right? So I think that and it's useful to the extent that we recognize that there are these humans walking around here, right, who have access to this category, right? And at the top of the chain is, we know, the white man, right? And then the white woman, and then some other folks who are not Black, right? And from there, right, and there's this whole thing happening among the humans, right? And then we, right, Black folks who don't have access to that category, actually, it is my contention that we inhabit a category that exceeds the human, right? That actually doesn't need it, right? But we also have the responsibility, or feel the responsibility, right, of living in the world in which the category of the human is still the ultimate category in which we have to sort of live, move, and have our being, right? And yet we actually exceed and disrupt that category all of the time, right? And we exist in this subject position that actually, I think, is way more generative than the category of the human, right? But we also have these, we are structured by, right, the category of the human and genres of the human that include woman, man, all these other things, right? And we are compelled to also figure out a way to exist within those, right? And I'm trying to work out the relation between that kind of wrestling with Du Bois's articulation of double consciousness, right? And I'm actually trying to work this out currently in my dissertation project, right? But some of what we are experiencing, right, is also about the desire to be counted in these categories that we don't have any use for, right? Except that we recognize that our the way that we are articulated always and already outside of those categories also creates the conditions for all of the violence that we experience, right? So I'm really careful about just not being out here and being like, Black folks ain't human, right? Because that statement is so complicated, because what I actually mean is that we exist beyond and in excess of this category of the human, where we are doing so much other generative possible stuff in which we don't necessarily need the imprimatur of the category of the human, right? And yet, the minute we sort of move over into that category and demand that we be considered human too, right, which is a problem, right, or woman too, right, then we experience the violence that is inherent in that category to keep us out, right? And yet, we don't have there. I don't know yet, right, what I'm proposing in terms of the move and in terms of living the duality or even the multiplicity of that complication. But what I do know is that those categories don't serve us, right? And I mean those genres, including gender categories, right? And so what does it mean for us to live in the fullness, in the queerness that is Blackness, right? While still also creating the conditions for being protected from the violence that emerges from these categories, namely the category of the human and its attendant genres.
I guess I after watching so much of this and reading the first person essays, God Delivered Me from Homosexuality essays, after a while I was like, okay, maybe they can just have that. Maybe they can just have that, and then everybody else who wants to be free can have their own thing. And then yesterday, I watched my final Jackie Hill Perry video, and I saw a comment on that video that said, "I'm struggling with lesbianism. I wish God could help me like he helped you." And that's when I was like, oh no, this can't just be out here. This can't just exist. So how do we go about, or how do y'all, because I'm not really in this, but how do you go so like, how do we let people know that struggle, that suffering, that it doesn't have to be this way, that there are other options?
I think that that's a really good question. And it's one that I am always trying to work out again in community. I definitely think, so I think that one, I think it's important to recognize that the kind of Christianity that Jackie Hill Perry and others practice is toxic, right? And I think that that's really important. And I think that to recognize it as toxic and to recognize that it is not the only Christianity that is available to people who wish to practice Christianity, right? There's a challenge with thinking about Christianity as this universal religious practice, right? Because then everybody keeps trying to fit into this thing that they believe contains an innate universality that I don't happen to think is true, right? And I think the proof that that is not true is that Black people had to create another religion, and Christianity was actually the label that was available for it, right?
Ooh.
But this white evangelical stuff that is happening is not Black Christianity, right? And so, which is not to say that Black Christianity is absolved from this conversation, because I don't think that it is, right? I'm just saying that the two are not the same, right? And so if we can do that, we can also create other modes and other ways of practicing Christianity that don't require a certain kind of repression of the flesh, right? So when somebody makes that comment on Jackie Hill Perry's site, right? Somebody somewhere has to be available to say, this is not the only Christianity that's available for you, sibling, right? Or like whoever it is in the comments, right? We have to have already created the for a particular kind of religious practice that may or may not be Christianity, but also in this case can hold the label of Christianity if somebody is looking for a Christian home, right? A Christian community that does not look like that, right? Because she is practicing a form of Christianity. She has an audience, a place, a community, and they are doing a thing that requires a certain kind of repression and disavowal of the flesh and fleshly desires, right? And so somebody has to present an alternative to that.
Another thing I thought was so fascinating was they make it, the ex-homosexuals, make it sound so gentle. We're going to help you. You're going to be free. You're going to walk with Jesus. And I'm like, I can see if I was deeply struggling, I could see why the kind of words that you're using would be so appealing, you know, like, and the way that Jackie presents her story as a victorious story. She's living the nuclear family ideal, husband, 2 children, I think, maybe more than that, but still, like, she's doing it. I could see how somebody might get lured into that.
I mean, and that's the thing, because it is benevolent, gentle, polite, beautiful, well manicured, well branded hatred. And that's the hardest thing to come up against, because when you say, yo, this is going to push somebody to their limit. This is going to push someone to, the testimonies I've heard this week about how just that video existing has, people have said they've noticed their substance use has increased, their suicidal ideations have increased. They've gotten gaslighting emails from family members who say, if it's possible for her, it's possible for you. And then, you have the people who will send these sorts of things to you with that gaslighting one-word question, which is thoughts. They'll just be like,
yes,
here's Jackie Hill Perry. Thoughts?
Thoughts is the worst shit on the internet.
With the 3 question marks.
Yeah.
They love the thoughts.
Exactly. And I want to say that internalized oppression is real too. That there are ways that we hate ourselves. And I want to be very clear that, like, I have not arrived. I am still working through with my therapist and with my folks, ways to actively love myself. And so it is not up to me to label who Jackie is. But I think if this is, an expression where she is, it appears like a loving, I don't know. I actually don't know if it's a loving relationship. Let me not say that. but it has been a relationship that she has tolerated for some reason. And I do think that it's possible that, and I know that she would not accept this, and I don't label people for them, but I think it also opens us up to think about a lot of these ex-gay folks are not actually now straight. They've had organic relationships to people of all genders, multiple genders, and have just chosen to be with the person that God told them is the right person, or they think that God told them is the right person. And so I do think that this is also, I mean, I want to say that I myself, in like the last few years, have become more comfortable not just identifying as queer, but also as bi. And I was not always that person. I had internalized biphobia, and I had very like limited understandings of what the word meant. And it wasn't until people called me out and called me in and were like, yo, sis, what you think bisexuality is, it's actually not. And at first, I am embarrassed to say that I doubled down to say, no, I'm right. And it took years, not just working with therapy, being with community folk who identify as bi and queer and otherwise, to really understand that a lot of what we're doing around understanding our identities is happening under cis-het gaze. And so it's forcing us to live into ways and modes of being that are still acceptable to cis-het normative gaze. And so there is a reason why, for example, bisexual women have disproportionate rates of anxiety, depression, and other mental health challenges, because when you tell someone over and over and over again, wasn't you just with a dude? Wasn't you just with a woman? What kind of gender are you dating now? What kind of gender are you? Like, when people continue to question you and back you into a corner and push you into this place of justifying what you are, you have all these other related struggles of, oh my God, like, well, if God did it for Jackie, why can't I get rid of this other thing? And so you've got this tape in your head, you've got a cop in your head who was policing you and teaching you that when you were dating dudes, there was something wrong and you were lying. When you were dating someone who was gender queer, oh, well, maybe you just didn't know what you, like, there's this constant self-reflection and constant questioning that happens under cis-het gaze. And so I have deep concerns for the people of God in this hour, because the places and spaces that we would ordinarily be working these things through are now not available to us. And because of Corona, because of shutdowns, because of surveillance, it is that much more difficult to, it's that much more difficult to find your people and say, yo, I think this person's kind of cute. Like, I don't know what that means about me. I can't do that on my Twitter threads. I can't do that in public on Facebook. I can't do it on Instagram. Like, there's a, you know, as Zora was saying earlier, the fleshly kind of ways that we hold space for each other are now not present. And so my concern when the video came out and in the week that we were telling him to take it down was for people who were questioning, certainly for gay and lesbian folks, certainly for trans folks, certainly for people who are queer, and people who are bi, who are now like, well, damn, like, which part of me is lying? And there's this sense that, like, you know, these are some of the, like, the homophobic things that we may hear in our own context. Why you want a stud if you could get a dude? Like, they look the same. Like, what's, like these sorts of questions, and really invasive and unkind ways that people are minding business that's not theirs. And so now across the world, everyone is in their house, and it is theological malpractice for anyone to do anything except say, God loves you, conspires for your flourishing, is with you when you're struggling, and is ready to scrap when people try you. And so it is evil. It's demonic. It is the lie of white supremacy and all its ideological cousins. It's this power grab, again, to get your book sales up. She knows what she's doing. He knows what he's doing. And so to do that, to aspire for more power, to aspire for more views, more clicks, more followers, when doing so is causing damage to the body of Christ, is causing damage to people who didn't get to go to Pride outside. And sure, Pride is not about the glitter and the parade, but it is about community. Now you got people who work themselves up to say, okay, I'm gonna go this year. I'm gonna go find my people. I'm gonna go, collect with whomever and do this and that. And now you're stuck in the house, not just with anybody, but with people who are praying for your transformation because there's something wrong with you. Mm-hmm. So I believe that at some point, these folks are gonna have to account for that. You're gonna have to stand and account for the harm that has actually been done in the name of God.
Mm-hmm. Well, Zora can. Oh,
sorry. No, go ahead. I was just gonna say that to add to your point about the cishet gaze, right, which is also anti-Blackness, right? It is that gaze that created or creates or insists upon the idea that identity is this stable thing that one can claim and that's it, right? And this is also the way that I think about queerness, right? Not as an identity, right? But as a process and a practice, right? That allows for a particular kind of engagement with the world, right? With a particular kind of relation with and in community that doesn't require this claiming or this constant claiming of a stable identity of sorts, right? Whether that identity is a sexual identity or whether that is a gender identity in a certain way, right? But I think that being one who is a Blackness practitioner, right, which is a queerness practitioner, right, it opens up a particular kind of field of possibility, right, and a possibility of relation that allows the kind of dynamism that is like life and living, right? I mentioned earlier my love and appreciation for ancestor Octavia E. Butler, right? Who y'all probably know and hear this all the time, but asserts that God is change, right? Right? Which is to say that God is this dynamic force, right? That there is no stability in this notion of God, right? So if there is no stability in this notion of God, then there is also no stability in this notion of self, right? So, and that opens this field of possibility for relation that doesn't require us to stake a claim, right, in anything, right? And this is why, right, to be able to say I am functionally heterosexual, right, while disavowing a certain kind of queer desire, right, is really to negate the presence of God, right? If one really thinks that and believes in this God who is change, right? And I think that to be forced into the stability of identity, which is a lie, right, is a violent thing. Right. And it keeps people asking, what am I? Right. As opposed to asking, how am I? Right. And how are you? Right. How can we be in relation together? Right. How can we be in relation with each other to, like I said before, bring about the end of this world that's killing us all, right? And so I think that that's just a really important thing when we begin to think about identity, and especially think about the way that these questions around, oh, it happened for her, why can't it happen for you? And the answer is it didn't happen for her, right? Like, she tells you that much, right? It has not happened for her, right? And so the idea that it has is also rooted in like profit, right? Like the book can sell if we believe, or if a certain sect of people believe that it has happened for her. But what we know from her own mouth is that it actually hasn't happened for her, right? Because God is change, right? And even in this ministry that she is working, and she is working it, right? That like they need to believe that, but it's actually not happening for her, right? Because you cannot diminish queer desire, right? Like Blackness does not exist for that kind of repression, right? And so I think that is really important as we think about how to both respond and be in conversation and community with the people who have been hurt by the things that she has said, both in her general ministry, but particularly in that interview with Kev on Stage.
Candace, Zora, thank you guys so much for joining me for this conversation. There is a lot here. I know people are going to be taking furious notes. There is so much. It is so meaty and so juicy, and I appreciate your thoughts.
Likewise, thank you both. It has been really, really great to take this time and be with both of you.
Same. Y'all just brought me so much joy. I hope I can drink my tea and be well tonight.
Indeed. Ashe.
Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Now, wasn't that good? Didn't you learn something? Oh, I love it. I love brilliant Black women. Thank you to Candace. Thank you to Zora. I appreciate y'all so freaking much. Leave a comment down below. Hit me up on Instagram or Twitter. Shout out to the patrons. Shout out to the members. Y'all saw this video a couple weeks ago. So I appreciate y'all for letting me know that it deserves to be on this channel. Buy some merch, sign up for the email newsletter. You guys, we're still in a pandemic. Wear a mask, social distance. Why are y'all on vacation? Why am I seeing more and more people on vacation? Where are you traveling to? We'll talk about it later. I'll talk to y'all. Bye.